On October 14, 1949, just after the first frost settled across Claiborne County's ridgelines, Deputy Roy Kellis was dispatched to a collapsed root cellar near an abandoned home outside Sugar Fork Creek. The tip came from a drifter named Alvin Dorsey, who said he was following smoke that wasn't there. What Kellis found buried beneath rotted beams and moss-covered stone was not in his training manual, nor, it seemed, meant for any public file. Two child-sized skeletal remains, positioned face-to-face, arms tied together with rusted fencing wire, lips wax-sealed shut like the end of a ritual candle, and resting between their rib cages, a scorched child's Bible with half the pages missing. There was no report in the county records, not under missing persons, not under found remains, not under arson. What existed instead was an envelope marked non-official, dismissed. Inside was one badly photocopied image of the remains, a single line in typewritten courier font. Identical, female, stage 8. Waxed. Unidentifiable. Release discouraged. For over 4 decades, that envelope was misfiled in a mislabeled box of mine collapse incident reports, buried in the back of the Claiborne County Office of Records. It wasn't until 1993, when a regional archivist named Deborah Feeney was tasked with digitizing old coal mine logs, that she stumbled upon it. The contents sent her into a spiral. She left her job 3 weeks later and was last reported living off-grid in Virginia, but not before she copied one line from the envelope's margin and sent it anonymously to a folklore professor at the University of Tennessee. Let the twin flames take the sin. What's most disturbing is not the file itself. It's what came after. The archived church notes, the doctored census rosters, the lack of female births in that part of Claiborne for nearly 20 years after 1950. And most chilling of all, the whispered name that keeps reappearing in charred hymnals, in midwives' journals, in court logs with no official copies. The Candle Sisters. They were never baptized, never buried, and according to the few who speak of them, never truly gone. In 1971, a retired church deacon gave a deathbed interview in which he muttered the words, "They said the twins would end it, but they lit them instead." The nurse recorded the statement in a logbook that would later disappear during a facility fire. Again and again, the narrative dissolves into ash. Fires, burned files, stories that were told once, then never repeated, or worse, punished for being remembered. Even among Appalachian communities steeped in oral traditions and generational secrets, the Candle Sisters stand out. They don't appear in school records after 1942, yet multiple teacher ledgers from 3 separate counties show a pair of identical names scribbled faintly in pencil, Twyla C. and Minna C. They don't appear in any known baptism rolls, but a back page of a private church's financial ledger shows a mysterious recurring tithe labeled Candle Firewood Fund, $4.66 monthly. A photograph found in 2006 beneath the floorboards of the abandoned Pine Hollow Church shows 2 girls dressed identically in white dresses with black hems, one smiling, one blurred. On the back, Twins of the Fire, 1943. The photo has not been authenticated, but the attic of that church still bears, scratched into the beam above the organ loft, the same phrase from the envelope, "Let the twin flames take the sin." The question becomes harder to ignore the deeper you go. Were these children simply victims of a deranged congregation? Was it a local cult operating under the guise of holiness? Or, as several death records now suggest, was there a generational cycle being repeated, disguised as grief and dressed in the language of fire? One 1951 police blotter entry reads only, "Found 2 girls again, ages match. Family won't press." Shutting it down. Tell Reverend Jessup. There is no known Reverend Jessup on any Claiborne County payroll from that year, but a pastor by that name does appear in a burned registry from a church that has since vanished from county blueprints. Its last surviving architectural drawing shows a sanctuary with twin pulpits and a hollowed-out altar base, one large enough to hide 2 small bodies. And yet, Amid the erasures, the silence, and the scorched absence of institutional memory, the people remember. Or at least, their descendants remember enough to whisper warnings. In 1988, a woman who grew up near Sugar Fork told a traveling journalist, "My grandma said no mirrors after sundown. That's when you see the girls walk through flame." In 2002, a man calling into a Knoxville radio show during a Halloween special said he once found a melted child's shoe nailed to a tree behind his cabin. It had the word Minna carved in the sole, he said before hanging up. But perhaps the most compelling account, and the most damning, comes from a sealed psychiatric evaluation dated 1973, filed at the Appalachian Regional Asylum under patient ID number G-4437. The patient, a woman in her 30s, was institutionalized for repetitive self-inflicted burns. Her spoken record is fragmented but includes the line, "We lit our names into the world. We said yes together. They burned us anyway." Her name? Minna Candle, though no birth record of her exists in any U.S. registry. So what was this? A shared delusion, a mass cover-up, or something older and ritualistic? There is a haunting consistency in all these stories. Two girls, fire, silence, return. They were born together, they died together, but someone, somewhere, kept the fire burning. If you've ever heard the name Candle in a family story, if your grandmother once warned you about two girls who speak in one voice, if a house in your family history was mysteriously lost to fire, we need you to write it. Help us uncover what they tried to burn away. And subscribe, because every comment brings another file to light. Claiborne County sits like a bruise in the bend of the Cumberland Gap, surrounded by mountains that seem to lean in on you the longer you stay. Fog doesn't just settle here. It clings, refusing to rise until the afternoon sun forces it back. On a map, it looks harmless, rural, tucked along the Tennessee-Kentucky border. But the deeper you go past Tazewell, down the switchback roads with no names and past mailboxes with missing flags, you start to feel what locals have always known. This is a place built to vanish. Geographically, Claiborne has always been isolated. It was bypassed by the railway in 1912, denied highway infrastructure in the 1930s, and left off several cartographic updates between 1970 and 1990 due to incomplete census feedback. Government documents describe the area as statistically irrelevant, and yet the people remained, mostly farmers, mine workers, and church families, clinging to land passed down through bloodlines older than the state of Tennessee itself. But what makes Claiborne truly unsettling isn't what's there, it's what isn't. School records stop abruptly after 1943 for entire townships. Property deeds list owners who died decades earlier. One road, officially called County Line 8, appears on paper but not in asphalt. It's a dirt path swallowed by pine and laurel, leading to an old tobacco barn and a cemetery with no headstones, just charred wooden stakes. This is a county that ate itself over time. What used to be a dozen mining towns dissolved into silence after the 1927 coal collapses. Mines shut down, the local economy folded, and one by one, families packed their bags and left, leaving only their names etched into rusted mail slots and stained courthouse pages. But some didn't leave. Some stayed in the valleys, in the cabins hidden by ridgelines and time. They lived without electricity, without schools, without outside interference, and in their isolation, stories were born. Or preserved. Pine Hollow was one such town, or maybe more accurately, a hamlet. No zip code, no running water. A one-room church, a butcher, a blacksmith, and 24 houses circling a dead elm that locals called the prayer tree. No one knows why it was called that, except maybe the stories about whispers heard beneath it during windless nights. According to the 1921 surveyor's log, the town sat between two low ridges along Sugar Fork, which by 1950 had dried into a muddy gash. A gas station opened there in 1958, and burned down in 1961 under unexplained circumstances. The 1930 U.S. Census shows a population of 137 for Pine Hollow. By 1940, that number dropped to 68. In 1950, just 12 residents were listed, all male, no girls, no women. And the census taker's notes include the unusual phrase, "All daughters sent away." Sent where and why? No explanation followed, and the census agent, one Lyle Hopkins, apparently filed no future assignments with the Bureau. His employee file is marked severed with no cause. Locals born before 1960 recall being told to avoid the hollow, especially after sundown. A 1974 interview with a retired county mail carrier includes the line, "I never delivered up there after Halloween. The girls come out then." That same interview ends with the man tearing up, refusing to elaborate and whispering, "I ain't talking about the twins. Don't ask me no more about the twins." There's a detail that resurfaces repeatedly across stories, decades, and families: the absence of girls. More specifically, the absence of girls surviving past the age of 10. From 1950 to 1972, Claiborne's regional health reports note an unusual imbalance in birth gender data. 83% male live births. County Medical Officer Dr. Willis Hargrove wrote in a 1965 letter to the State Health Board, "No scientific explanation for this skew, maybe due to rural reporting gaps. Locals say girls don't stay long." That's their phrase. Don't stay long. The phrase appears again in a 1977 tape recording from a high school oral history project. "Mama said if I had a sister, I wouldn't keep her. Not 'cause I'd lose her, but 'cause the hollow would take her." Then there's the matter of Candle Lane. The road doesn't exist on any modern map, but several locals and a handful of 1950s-era directories reference it as a side path off Route 33, near a church that no longer stands. In 1984, a group of amateur genealogists from Knoxville went looking for the Candle homestead. They found a clearing with melted glass shards, scorched ground, and what appeared to be remnants of small shoes buried heel-up beneath ash piles. They published their findings in a local zine, then retracted it a year later after receiving what they called pressure from unknown parties. Even the churches, the lifeblood of most Appalachian communities, seem to have conspired in silence. Pine Hollow Baptist, for instance, burned in 1947, was rebuilt, then burned again in 1965. Each time the cause was listed as accidental stove ignition, though the town had no electricity or gas connections. The bell tower, made of black iron, survived both fires, and on its inner rim, someone carved 16 identical lines, all reading, "Born 2, died as 1, still return." This inscription was only discovered in 2001 during a preservation effort led by a university archivist. That archivist, Kimberly Thorne, died by suicide 4 months later. Her final journal entry reads simply, "They're still here." So what was Claiborne County really hiding? Or more terrifyingly, what was it protecting the rest of us from? Was the isolation a shield or a cage? Were these vanishing girls simply collateral to poverty, abuse, and generational neglect? Or was something more, coordinated at work? Something ancient, ritualistic? Even now, satellite images of the area show strange land patterns. A perfect circle of blackened earth near Sugar Fork. A triangle-shaped grove with no undergrowth. One drone pilot in 2019 captured footage of smoke rising from the middle of Candle Ridge, a formation not listed on any geological survey. Despite no known fire activity, no campsite, no human presence for miles. The footage vanished from the uploader's YouTube channel days later. The account was deleted, but a cached comment from the video remains. They always burn in pairs. The town forgot itself, or was made to forget. Maps erased it, records abandoned it, but bloodlines remain, and blood doesn't forget. Especially not in places where stories rot in the soil and memory grows like moss on stone. If you've ever found a melted object in the woods, if you've heard of Pine Hollow but can't find it on a map, if your grandmother had a sister who never made it to 10, then you already know. And we need you to tell us, before the story disappears again. Every forgotten town has a forgotten family, the kind that slips through the cracks of birth ledgers and marriage licenses, leaving behind only rumors, nicknames, and warnings sewn into bedtime stories. In Claiborne County, that family was Candle, not the candles, not plural. Locals always said it singular. That's Candleland, or she's got the candle look, the way one might refer to a curse or an affliction. And yet, no such family appears in the official census records after 1930. No property deeds list the Candle's surname. There are no graves in any local churchyard bearing that name. And still, the stories persist, especially the one about the twin girls born without a cry on a windless night in January 1935 to a girl named Rebecca Ann Candle, age 16. The father's name was never spoken, not once, but in a single fragile document, a marriage certificate filed in neighboring Bell County, Kentucky. A union is recorded between Rebecca A. Candle and Franklin Lott, a man twice her age, listed as a circuit preacher. The paper is yellowed and stained, filed under a misaligned tab marked Lot Luz. In the corner, a crimson wax smudge interrupts the registrar's signature. Twyla and Minna were the names, or so say the whispers. Identical twin girls, often seen walking hand in hand through the back pews of Pine Hollow Church, never speaking unless spoken to, and even then, speaking in perfect unison. A 1942 school ledger from the Letcher Hollow district briefly lists Twyla C. and Minna C. under Grade 3. A faint pencil note beside the names reads, "Keep separated during recess. Avoid flame." Unsettling effect on other children. It's the only known educational record of them. By the following semester, their names vanish from the list entirely. But what makes the Candle lineage more than just folklore are the fragments buried in unexpected places. In the diary of midwife Velma Horrell, who served the Claiborne area from 1940 to 1960, several entries mention girls with candle eyes, wide silver-gray irises with a strange reflective sheen. One entry from 1948 reads, "Another girl born near Sugar Fork. Looks just like the others. Pale skin, quiet lungs. Burned before I could name her. There's no hospital birth certificate for that date. No official death notice either. But the county crematorium logs show a spike in child incinerations that year. 4 cases marked stillbirth, immediate. All female. All within 12 miles of Pine Hollow. There are also repeated mentions of a particular look. Thin limbs, long fingers, skin pale as beeswax. In a 1955 letter from missionary schoolteacher Eleanor Betts, she describes 2 girls who appeared at her makeshift classroom without any enrollment record. They called themselves Minna Twyla, like it was one word. They never blinked when I prayed aloud. And when the fire in the stove flared up, they smiled for the first time. The letter was never sent. It was found decades later in an envelope tucked inside the cover of a scorched hymnal recovered from a church fire. Her fate remains unknown. In rural communities like Claiborne, where baptism is a holy milestone and the church is more binding than the courthouse, it's notable, even chilling, how many people say the Candle girls were never baptized. Several accounts refer to them as unwatered or dry-born. One pastor's journal, dated 1939, simply states, "The twins shall not touch the basin." They were fire-called, not watermarked. In Appalachian belief systems, especially among deeply superstitious congregations, this would mean the children were never officially claimed by God, left vulnerable to evil, or, in some sects, designated as vessels for generational sin. There's also the unsettling rumor of the Black Communion, a secret rite said to have taken place once every 13 years at Pine Hollow, during which a pair of unbaptized twins were placed on either side of the altar and fed from a single piece of unleavened bread marked in wax. No official record of this ritual exists, of course, but in the personal effects of Deacon Clyde Rowell, recovered after his death in 1981, was a folded paper listing 3 sets of twin names ending with Twila and Minna. Consumed, 1949. The word consumed is underlined. The paper also included a charcoal drawing of 2 girls with melted candles where their faces should be. In 1962, a local folklorist conducting interviews in Claiborne reported speaking with a woman named Judith, who claimed to be the cousin of the Candle twins. The recording, now degraded by age, captures her saying, "They was born already burning. My aunt said their breath steamed like smoke even in summer. They weren't meant to stay. That's why Mama never let them be named proper. Once you name them, they stay too long." Judith was later institutionalized in Chattanooga and died in 1971. The doctor's notes from her file mention recurring hallucinations involving fire, mirrors, and the girls who call at the windows. Over the years, 3 other surnames have been quietly linked to the Candle line through oral testimony and fragmented records: Lot, Horrell, and Latch. These names appear sporadically in missing persons reports, school withdrawal slips, and church donation logs from the 1940s through the 1970s. None of the families ever claimed ties to Candle directly, but community midwives and teachers often scribbled side notes, "Looks Candle," or similar to last year's Candle Girl. In a chilling 1973 logbook from a Claiborne medical clinic, a nurse writes, "Saw girl with wax burn marks again. Mother said she's the last Candle, told me to forget her face." No further information was recorded. The logbook ends 2 pages later. That clinic burned down in 1976, and no patient records were recovered. And yet, the Candle name keeps surfacing. In court cases, in psychiatric records, in the margins of family Bibles too burned to open fully. Always just outside verification, like a shadow your eye catches but can never fix in place. Some researchers now believe that the Candle line was deliberately removed from public record, that officials, clergymen, or even blood relatives conspired to erase their existence out of fear or guilt. Or perhaps something older, obedience, as if knowing their name, preserving it, might invite something back. In 2001, a university team researching Appalachian rituals interviewed a 91-year-old woman who once worked as a cleaner at Pine Hollow Church. When asked about the Candle family, she whispered, "We scrubbed that name from the pews every week, but it always came back in wax. The Candle girls, if they lived, were daughters nobody baptized, and if they died, they were daughters nobody buried. They linger, not just in myth, but in the echoes between what was recorded and what was deliberately left blank. The hollers of Claiborne keep secrets well, but names, especially names like Candle, have a way of flaring up again. If your family ever spoke of twin girls who never aged, if your family Bible has pages torn around the 1930s, if someone in your bloodline once carried the name Candle or the mark of wax on their skin, we want to know. Write it below. Let the forgotten be remembered. Before someone tries to burn it again, you don't need official scripture to bind a people. In places like Pine Hollow, where the mountain air stays thick with pine smoke and memory, belief travels not through books, but through repetition. Whispers passed between mothers and midwives, worn phrases etched into barn doors, sermons that never touched ink but were tattooed into custom and fear. And nowhere was that belief more distilled, more ritualized, than in the way Pine Hollow treated its daughters. In Appalachian folklore, fire has always held double meaning. It is purification and punishment, light and destruction. But in Pine Hollow's unspoken theology, built from half-remembered Bible verses and local superstition, fire became a kind of sacrament. The Candle sisters, they say, were never punished. They were offered. During renovations to the Pine Hollow Church in 1947, just 2 years before the second Great Fire that reduced most of the interior to ash. A restoration crew found strange objects buried beneath the pulpit stage. A copper basin filled with hardened wax and scorched hair. A wood-bound prayer book open to a blank page on which someone had drawn twin silhouettes in red ink, both engulfed in flame, and a clay bowl containing 12 waxed thimbles, one for each female born in the township that year. The thimbles, local lore insists, were melted ceremonially every winter solstice, part of a ritual the deacons referred to only as the reversal. The act was never spoken of directly, but a surviving sermon note dated December 21, 1942, includes the line, "Let their hands be covered in silence, so their mouths may not bring the flame to us." In the hollow beneath the old church, black mold curls up over scorched beams and empty candle racks. The air is close, sweet, and acrid, a mixture of rot and wax. Etched into the stone support pillar, in uneven script barely visible without torchlight, is the sentence, "Let the twin flames take the sin." No source ever claimed authorship, but a 1973 field journal by folklore archivist Dwight Pritchard, himself later institutionalized, notes, Pine Hollow practices involve gender-specific fire rites, primarily targeting identical twin girls. Purpose unclear. Locals non-responsive or cryptic. One elderly woman muttered, "They hold our shame in their mouths. We must seal it shut before it's spoken." That phrase, "seal it shut," may not be metaphor. Coroner records from the misfiled 1949 remains list an unusual detail. Both skeletons found in the Sugar Fork root cellar had wax deposits fused across the mandibles. One jaw still had traces of leather binding. In forensic terms, the practice would be considered ceremonial sealing, something rarely documented outside of post-plague Europe or African diasporic death traditions. But in Pine Hollow, it had another name. According to a torn page recovered from a burned catechism, the act was referred to as mouthing the offering. The page lists 2 preconditions. They must be born on the same day. They must not be spoken to separately. It's this final condition that appears again and again in survivor testimonies. People recall the Candle twins and other girls thought to be part of the same bloodline, never being addressed individually. They were always just the girls, even when you meant one, said one woman in a 1982 interview. They answered as one, always. If you called Minna, Twila looked up too. Another former Pine Hollow resident recalled, "My daddy told me that if you ever heard one of them speak without the other, it meant the fire hadn't finished." These beliefs did not exist in isolation. The surrounding counties, too, show evidence of similar doctrines, passed through secret pages and whispered across fences. A traveling preacher named Ezra Toll, active in the 1930s and 40s, kept a sermon diary in which he lamented the burning fever of the Hollow girls. In one entry, he writes, "Their tongues are ash. Their mothers won't weep. They believe the offering spares the men. It don't. It just silences the house." This belief, that the twins were sacrifices for a greater community cleansing, echoes through multiple church logs. The doctrine appears to claim that twins, especially girls, could absorb generational sin. One doctrine draft titled, "Of Dual Flames and Silent Kin," found partially burned in a deacon's chest, outlines a process by which vessels, children, are sanctified by smoke and returned before speech makes shame manifest. In plain terms, burn them before they talk about what they saw or what was done to them. In 1954, a ledger entry from an offshoot church in Harlan County, Kentucky, contains a strange notation. "Girls with candle hair returned this winter. We sang the muffling hymn. Fire was late but accepted." The muffling hymn is believed to refer to a local lullaby passed through generations of Pine Hollow women. A tune with no known lyrics but often hummed over open flame. Several folklorists have noted the recurring melody in unrelated interviews across 3 counties. The implication, that this wasn't just one church's belief, but a regional rite, masked in bedtime rituals and holiday pageants. One of the most disturbing artifacts comes from a 1967 children's Bible storybook, self-published by a Pine Hollow elder, in which the story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the biblical figures cast into the furnace, is retold with altered names: Minna, Twyla, and the Bell. The story ends not with salvation, but with the girls smiling as they light the sins of the town with their own breath. Scholars dismissed it as a fictionalization until a marginal note was found in a separate copy, reading, "Retold as was taught, praise the hush." It is this hush, this enforced silence, that defines the candle legacy. Not just literal silence from the girls themselves, but a community-wide agreement not to speak of them, to erase them in voice before paper. A culture of sealing, of suppressing, of preemptive shame burned into skin and ritual. In 1991, a folklorist visiting the region was handed a bundle of hand-copied hymns, each written on soot-stained paper and tied together with twine. One was titled simply, "The Offering." The lyrics, shaky and faded, included this stanza: "Two born bright, one flame split, let them burn. So we don't sit in the fire, we called our own, let their skin make silence home." If you ask the elders, they'll smile thinly and say it was just a poem, a song, something made up to scare children from playing with matches. But if you look into their eyes, the way they pull the curtain closed, the way they tap the window frame twice before turning away, you'll see it. That flicker, that memory, that unburned wax still soft beneath their nails. Beliefs don't vanish, they melt, take new shapes, reform, like wax. If your family ever hummed a tune with no words, if you were told not to light a candle in front of a mirror, if your family has twins who were never pictured alone, we want to know. Tell us what you remember, before someone melts the story again. The silence held for a time. Pine Hollow's rituals, whispers, and fire-lit theology all burned beneath the surface, just beyond the reach of official record. But belief, no matter how buried, eventually flickers into sight. And in the late 1940s, the outside world began to notice the smoke. It began with a school nurse named Irene Mallory. Originally from Chattanooga, she was assigned by the Tennessee State Board of Health to conduct physical examinations in underdocumented mountain schools. In October 1948, she arrived in Claiborne County with a medical bag, a clipboard, and a bureaucratic optimism that would soon curdle into dread. Her notes, salvaged from a single surviving carbon copy addressed to her supervisor, tell a chilling story. In one entry, she describes visiting a one-room schoolhouse near Sugar Fork. Only 12 children in attendance, 10 boys, 2 girls, identical twins, age estimated 7 to 9, refused to give names. Teacher called them simply the sisters. Mallory observed severe scarring on their forearms, symmetrical and deliberate, almost like branding. She noted the girls' silence, their synchronized movements, and what she called a deep-set stillness behind their eyes. Not trauma, not fear, something colder. She returned the next week to follow up. The schoolhouse was locked. The teacher was gone. According to county records, no official school was ever registered at that location. 3 days later, Mallory submitted her resignation. Her final report included a single paragraph, heavily redacted in surviving copies, but with one legible line remaining. The townspeople speak of fire like it's a blessing. They call the girls clean. They say no ashes remain. She left Claiborne on October 31st, 1948. She was never seen again. Her car was later found near the state line, abandoned, with 2 child-sized handprints in ash across the rear window. Then came the article, a single line buried in the obituary section of the Tazewell Echo, dated November 4th, 1949. 2 sisters returned to God. The candles burned clean. No names, no funeral time, No listed survivors. Just that one sentence, more riddle than record. Local journalist Ruth Edgington tried to follow up, but her notes, kept in a personal ledger now archived at the University of Tennessee, suggest resistance at every level. The local sheriff declined to comment. The church elders politely declined. A neighbor claimed the girls never existed, not really. But Ruth's private journal, found after her death, tells another story. In it, she wrote, "I found the house. I saw the wax ring on the floor. I heard someone breathing behind the door, but no one was there. I don't think they're gone." That same month, county authorities made a quiet visit to a root cellar on private land near Candle Ridge. The report, marked non-official, described the discovery of two partial skeletons, juvenile, gender unlisted, found lying in a ring of melted wax facing each other. The report was stamped closed. The bones were never sent to Knoxville for autopsy. According to a later clerical note in the margin, "Do not reinitiate unless more are found." Outside institutions began to sniff around. The University of Kentucky sent a team of anthropology students in 1952, conducting door-to-door surveys about burial customs. They lasted less than a week. Their professor, Dr. Amos Clive, was later interviewed under subpoena in a separate child welfare case. His response when asked about Pine Hollow, "We were told to leave." Told very clearly. And then the church bell rang even though there was no rope. The court records of that case were sealed in 1955. Dr. Clive never gave another public statement. But the most damning moment, the true crack in the candle wax silence, came in the winter of 1953, when a newborn girl died under suspicious circumstances. The attending midwife, Velma Horrell, reported the infant was breathing shallow but stable. She handed the child to a churchwoman named Maylene Latch. Within an hour, the baby was dead, burned in the hearth, Maylene claimed, to save her soul. Local authorities filed no charges. The coroner ruled the cause of death as ritual cleansing. When questioned, the pastor said only she had the mark. That case reached Nashville. For a brief moment, the state threatened to intervene, but just days before investigators were scheduled to arrive, the Horrell home burned to the ground. Velma was never found. And Maylene? She vanished into the fog of Pine Hollow, leaving behind nothing but an unmarked thimble on her porch, still warm when officers arrived. After that, Claiborne folded back in on itself. Families stopped answering the door. The church was locked at all hours. Anyone asking questions, census takers, field workers, journalists, were met with cold eyes and closed gates. By the time the 1960 census came around, most townships in the region reported 0 female minors. Not. 1. No school-aged girls officially lived in Pine Hollow. Yet whispers continued about twins seen near the woods, candles burning in pairs behind windows, fire smoke in the shape of children. And in each of these instances, whether it was the nurse's sudden resignation, the sealed child death file, the journalist's vanishing notes, there was always one element left behind. Wax on a doorknob, across a windowsill, formed into a ring on the floorboards. Some believe it was a mark of protection, others say it was a signature, the only trace the girls ever left behind. But one detail remains consistent in all versions of the tale. The girls never screamed. If your town once buried a file before it buried a child, if you've heard someone say, "The candles burn clean," or if you have ever found wax in a place it had no business being, we want to hear from you, because the fire may have flickered, but it never went out. There's always one. One person who sees more than they should, who speaks when silence has been the law for generations. In stories like this, stories buried beneath county seals and ash-covered ruins, the witness is rarely believed, rarely protected, and never allowed to remain. In the case of the Candle Sisters, there are 5 such people. 5 known witnesses who tried to speak, in diaries, in interviews, in medical files. None of them survived long after doing so. All of them said something the town did not want repeated. The earliest voice belongs to Judith Horrell. In 1973, she gave a recorded statement to a visiting folklorist named Danny Weems. The tape was discovered decades later, mislabeled and stored among bird migration logs in the University of Kentucky's Natural Sciences Department. Judith's voice is slow, cracked by age and something else. The weight of memory, maybe. She speaks of her cousin Rebecca Ann Candle and of the twins. They were born fire bright, she says. I seen them just once, standing in the smoke at the foot of the church steps. They never moved, not even when the bell tolled, just looked up like they was listening to a song no one else could hear. Judith claimed that in 1949, she visited the Candle House after hearing the twins had fallen sick. What she found, she says, was two girls sitting inside a wax circle on the parlor floor, their hands bound in cotton thread, their mouths pressed shut not with tape, but with hardened wax, molded to their lips. They weren't dead, not yet, just waiting. They never blinked, she said. It was like they was already looking through me. 3 weeks after the interview, Judith's home caught fire. She was pulled from the wreckage alive, but badly burned. She died 2 days later. The fire marshal's report listed the cause as faulty wiring, but the investigators' private notes included an odd detail. 2 melted thimbles were found beside the bed. One bore the initials TC, the other MC. Then there was the psychiatric patient. Minna L., as she appears in redacted files from the Appalachian Regional Asylum, was admitted in 1971 after repeated episodes of night walking and self-inflicted burns. Her diagnosis was listed as catatonic repetition with pyromaniac delusions. But her therapist, Dr. Edward Voss, kept detailed private notes recovered after his death in 1987, in which he confessed a growing fear that her memories were not delusions, that something had been passed into her. In one session, Minna drew 2 perfect child-sized silhouettes in ash, then began humming what Dr. Voss described as a wordless circular melody. When asked what it meant, she said, "It's the muffling hymn. It's what you hum when you want the fire to stay asleep." More disturbing was what she whispered during her final session, shortly before being transferred to isolation. Twyla never left. She's still lighting the way. We were born flame first, and we'll come back the same. The asylum burned in 1973. Minna's records were presumed lost, but a page survived, found years later inside a box marked Recreation Therapy. It was a torn piece of music staff paper with a single line scrawled across it: Twyla returns in mirrors. Third, Eleanor Betts. She was a teacher assigned to a temporary classroom in the Claiborne region in the summer of 1952. Her assignment was brief, just 8 weeks. In that time, she wrote 2 letters to her sister in Charleston. The first describes her students as quiet, underfed, strange. The second, dated August 3rd, is more unnerving. In it, she describes 2 girls who arrived without enrollment paperwork. They stood in the back of the classroom for the entire day, never speaking. When asked their names, they wrote Minna Twyla on the chalkboard in one movement, sharing the same piece of chalk. Betts noted the peculiar way they shadowed one another, often blinking in rhythm, refusing food unless it was split exactly down the middle. On the final day of class, she brought a birthday cake for one of her students. The twins stared at it until the candles were lit, then began to hum, wordless, low. Eleanor ended the letter with, "There is something wrong with this place. I don't think those girls are new." She returned to Charleston later that month and was admitted to a psychiatric hospital 6 months later. Her personal journals, recovered after her death in 1979, contained dozens of drawings, each one showing 2 girls burning from the feet up, smiling as the flames reached their mouths. Fourth, a janitor named Harold Dean, who worked for Pine Hollow Baptist during its brief reopening in the 1980s. According to his cousin, who gave a statement to a local historian in 1992, Harold claimed to have found a small crawl space under the church stage, filled with candle remnants and children's shoes. He tried to report it to the pastor. 2 days later, he left town. His trailer was found, empty, dishes still in the sink, front door open. On the wall beside his bed, written in soot, was the phrase, "They hear you when you say their names." The final and most recent witness was a foster child named Eliza, aged 9, placed in temporary care near Sugar Fork in 2006. According to her caseworker's logs, Eliza repeatedly claimed she had a mirror sister who spoke to her at night, telling her to light the way back. The girl drew endless sketches, wax circles, burning thimbles, girls holding hands in flame. Her foster placement broke down after Eliza set fire to her own bed, whispering, "We're still not clean," as the smoke filled the room. Her case file was sealed. Her current whereabouts are unknown. What unites these 5 witnesses, a cousin, a patient, a teacher, a janitor, a child, is not just what they saw, but the way the world reacted to their truth. Suppression, disappearance, fire. The townsfolk say nothing because they believe the story must stay cold. But the witnesses, they brought heat, and heat always draws attention. Maybe that's the danger. Not the fire itself, but the knowing. Once the story is told, it returns. Once you name the sisters, you've already begun to invite them back. So if you've heard someone speak of the girls in your family, not individually but as one, if someone told you not to talk to the mirror at night, or if you've ever known someone who hummed before sleep and cried without knowing why, they may have seen them too. And if they did, what did they say before they disappeared? The most terrifying stories are not the ones told aloud, but the ones that vanish mid-sentence, the ones everyone knew and no one would say. In Claiborne County, that silence wasn't an accident. It was structured, enforced, burned into the walls of homes and offices. The question isn't whether the Candle Sisters existed. The question is, who made sure we forgot? It began slowly. A missing file here, a fire there. But as researchers began retracing the twisted threads of the Candle story, they noticed patterns in the silences, gaps that echoed each other across decades. Newspaper archives with cut-out articles, census pages mysteriously torn, baptismal rolls where every girl's name had been blacked out with tar, and most chillingly, a sequence of routine document fires that all originated from the same drawer, one marked Children, Unclaimed. In the late 1950s, a courthouse clerk named Nathan Roach wrote an unsent letter to the state's Department of Records, expressing concern over what he called recurrent document reclassification. He described a series of requests from then-Sheriff Harlan Jessup to pull and revise all files connected to female minors between the years 1935 and 1950. When Roach asked for a formal reason, Jessup replied, "Old ghosts don't need new paper." Nathan never sent the letter. He died in an apartment fire in 1962. The origin point was his filing cabinet. Harlan Jessup's name resurfaces often. He served as sheriff from 1944 to 1971, longer than any other official in Claiborne's history. There is not one known photo of him during that time, and yet he signed off on 64 unexplained child death certificates, 37 of which were labeled ritual trauma. Inconclusive. Not homicide, not accident, just inconclusive. When questioned in 1975 by a visiting journalist, Jessup answered, "There are names that don't belong in ink, and things that burn too clean to leave evidence." The journalist, Edie Blair of the Knoxville Sentinel, disappeared 3 days later. Her final notes, retrieved from a locked drawer in her motel, included the names Twyla, Minna, and Candle Ridge. She also scribbled the phrase, "The preacher knew." The preacher always knew, and he did. Reverend Saul Whitlow, pastor of Pine Hollow Baptist from 1937 until its second fire in 1965, was widely known for his sermons on generational burden and the necessity of silence. Congregation records show he baptized over 200 boys between 1940 and 1960. and not a single girl. When asked about it in a rare 1958 radio interview, he responded, "Not all souls need water. Some need fire." That's the old law. The radio station received threats for airing the clip. It was never rebroadcast. When the church burned for the second time in 1965, the fire marshal report listed no cause. But one line from a volunteer firefighter's testimony remains unredacted. The flames came from below, like the basement was full of breath. Within days, all salvageable records were removed from the site, not by local officials, but by unknown men in plain brown suits, seen loading boxes into unmarked vans. Witnesses say they had no badges, no jurisdiction, but one detail sticks out. Every man wore a black ring on his left hand, etched with the symbol of a flame split in two. Even the press seemed complicit or silenced. Between 1949 and 1975, only 2 articles in the Tazewell Echo mentioned child deaths. Both are single-sentence obituaries with no names, yet several death notices exist in the county ledger for girls under the age of 10 during that same period. How were these deaths documented legally, but never covered publicly? One explanation lies in the sudden and unexplained reshuffling of the county board in 1951. All 5 board members, each of whom had pushed for external investigation into Pine Hollow's schools, were removed under emergency protocol. The official reason given: security concerns related to Cold War compliance. And yet none of those men had ever been accused of misconduct. 2 of them would later die in separate, unrelated house fires. A third suffered carbon monoxide poisoning while on a fishing trip. The last 2 moved out of state, never speaking on record again. There's a word that comes up often in whispered interviews with older residents: muffling. Not just of sound, but of truth. One former teacher recalled being told never to keep written logs of her female students. They said the Hollow would send someone for the records. Best to keep nothing on paper. Another, a retired postmaster, remembered receiving a parcel every December, always from the same address, always containing wax-sealed envelopes marked with the names of girls who'd supposedly moved away, but no forwarding address. No reply when returned. The suppression didn't stop at institutions. Families were silenced too. In the oral history of the Latch family, passed down through 3 generations, one phrase recurs: "We don't say the girls' names, we don't mark the birth dates, and we don't light 2 candles unless someone's dead." That family, like others in the area, kept no photos of female children. One woman, a former midwife, reportedly kept the birth certificates of all girls she helped deliver in a locked wooden box hidden beneath her chicken coop. When her grandson went to recover them in 1999, the coop had burned to the ground. The records burned. The houses burned. But the fear remained. In the mid-90s, a group of folklore students attempted to stage a public reading of the Candle legends. They posted flyers in Claiborne and neighboring towns, inviting anyone with knowledge to come forward. 2 nights before the event, their rented lodge was set on fire. All materials lost. The event was canceled. A week later, an anonymous message was left on their university voicemail. Stories don't belong to strangers, especially the ones that light themselves. What becomes clear, horrifyingly clear, is that the silence was not passive. It was active, policed, upheld by clergy, by sheriffs, by neighbors, and by family. A community-wide pact that protecting the past was more important than protecting the children. What was being protected? The truth? Or the fire itself? Because maybe that's what the suppression really was. Not denial, but containment. An effort to keep the fire where it belonged, in memory, in ritual, in whisper, never in light. But fire spreads, even through silence, especially through silence. If you've ever tried to find a family death certificate and been told it never existed, if your grandmother told you she never had a sister, but once cried over a pair of melted shoes, if your county clerk's office burned and nobody seemed surprised, we want to hear it. Write it below. Let what they silenced burn bright. There's a place in Claiborne County no one lists on deeds, no one admits to owning, and no one wants to stand too close to after sundown. Locals call it simply the Candle House, though most won't call it anything at all, not because they've forgotten, but because remembering it too clearly is a risk to sanity, to safety, maybe even to memory itself. The house sits just past the tree line near Sugar, Fork Creek, down an unmarked path that was once a driveway and is now a trail choked with switchgrass and moss. It's not visible from the road. You won't find it on any GPS, but if you drive past the old pump station and listen closely, you'll hear it. The creak of wood that's not wine-blown, the faint flick of something behind glass that's too far gone to reflect. Locals claim it's always been there, older than the town, older than the church, maybe even older than the stories. And yet, no official record of its construction exists. The earliest known reference comes from a 1911 land survey, where it's labeled unmarked structure, unstable, uninhabited, contains ash. Then again, in a 1929 property dispute, when a neighbor claimed, "The girls watch from the top window, and my cattle won't graze past the fence line." In 1947, a fire inspector wrote in the margin of a township report, "Property at Candle Ridge still not demolished. Wax buildup visible on both sills. The Candle House is not large. One story, gabled roof. Stone foundation stained a deep brown that never seems to fade, no matter how long it goes uninhabited. But there is something uncanny about its posture, the way it sits too straight, too balanced, like it's holding its breath." One folklorist called it a place built to wait. Another simply said, "That house remembers." In 1987, two hikers from Knoxville stumbled upon it while mapping the ridge. They photographed the exterior, warped boards, a rusted weather vane, the silhouette of a twin cradle in the front room window. The image is faded now, but in the original, a white ring can be seen around the house, as if someone had poured wax along the entire perimeter. They entered through the side and reported a sudden drop in temperature, though the day outside was nearly 80 degrees. Inside, they found no furniture, no signs of occupation, just a floorboard beneath the hearth that was scorched black and soft to the touch. They said it smelled like burned honey. They left within 20 minutes. One of the hikers developed chronic sleep paralysis shortly after. In his journal, he wrote, "I wake up hearing them humming from the corners of the room. They never come closer, but I know it's them." One smile, one scream. In 1999, a paranormal team from Kentucky visited the house as part of a documentary project. They set up thermal cameras and motion sensors, all of which malfunctioned within an hour. One member of the crew, Dana L., claimed to see two child-sized figures standing in the doorway just after dusk, each holding what appeared to be a melted book. She was hospitalized for what doctors called a non-specific neurological shock response. She never returned to fieldwork. When asked later what she saw, she whispered, "They never blinked." And the room was full of smoke, but nothing burned. Their equipment, what survived, showed no heat signatures. But the footage captured something else. Just before the battery drained, the camera panned past a mirror in the front room. For a split second, two faces can be seen in the reflection, pale, symmetrical, childlike, one smiling, one watching. The mirror has since been shattered. In 2006, a real estate listing briefly appeared online describing a rustic Appalachian structure with historical charm, ideal for restoration. The listing disappeared within 48 hours. Calls to the contact number went unanswered. When a curious researcher tracked the listing ID, it redirected to a discontinued church property database. No one could verify who posted it. The email listed as the seller was Twila-Miniwax at .. followed by a corrupted domain. What's inside the house now is unclear. Those who have returned speak of warped dolls nailed to the underside of rafters, of melted shoes arranged in concentric rings on the floor, of a lingering warmth near the fireplace, even in January. One team claimed to hear singing, Not loud, not clear, but layered, like a song sung from inside another song. Others describe the air as too quiet, as if sound itself bent around the structure. Perhaps most unsettling is the house's resilience. It has never burned, not once, despite being surrounded by at least 4 brush fires over the last 70 years. In 1983, a controlled burn stopped precisely 5 feet from the porch, the smoke curling away like it hit glass. Firefighters on the scene claimed the flames refused to touch it. In 2015, lightning struck the gable. No damage, no blackening. The house remains untouched, and untouched is exactly how it's meant to be. Yet it is not forgotten. Children from nearby towns still speak of a burnt girl house. In 2020, a 9-year-old drew a picture during a school fire drill showing 2 girls waving from a doorway made of candles. The teacher asked if she'd seen it before. The girl replied, "Only in sleep." She says it's her turn next. And that is what the house seems to be. A place of turning. A cycle held in wax and wood and silence. Not a home, a ritual. If you've ever passed a clearing where the ground felt too warm, if your family warned you not to enter certain hollers after dark, if someone in your line claimed to have heard singing with no source, you may have walked close to it. Too close. Some places do not want to be found. Others want you to remember. And the Candle House? It never forgot. At first, the Candle Sisters seemed like a singular tragedy, a mystery confined to one bloodline, one house, one forgotten ridge in Claiborne County. But stories like this don't stay put. They bleed, they echo, and the deeper you go into the archives, the clearer the truth becomes. The Candles were not alone. Across 3 counties, Claiborne, Harlan, and Letcher, a pattern begins to emerge. Girls under the age of 10, always in pairs, always either vanished or dead under suspicious circumstances. School records that list sisters one year and omit them the next with no withdrawal slip. Midwife logs that mention identical births. Twins born clean, followed by blank entries or scribbled lines like "Mother refused name" or "Fire took the ledger." These are not isolated incidents. They are ritual-shaped absences, repeating, quiet, practiced. In 1923, the Latch family of Eastern Harlan reported twin girls born during a thunderstorm. No official birth certificate exists, but a church tithe note from that year includes the phrase, "2 candles given in thanks." The girls, Mary and Ruth Latch, appear only once in public record, in a school group photo from 1930. In the image, all children are facing forward, except the twins, who stand back to back, holding wax stubs in their palms. The photo was removed from the county archives in 1975. No one requested it. It simply disappeared. The Horrells of Letcher County had a similar case. In 1944, a death certificate was filed for a girl named Annalee Horrell, age 9, cause of death: kitchen fire. Her sister, Elsie, was never mentioned in the obituary, yet a teacher's ledger from that year lists Elsie H. as having withdrawn due to reunification. What does that word mean in a county that only listed one child's name? And why did a note from the school nurse, preserved on the back of an old supply receipt, include the chilling line, "They said the fire took them both, but I only saw one body"? Then there are the Lott twins, children of Franklin Lott, the same preacher who married Rebecca Ann Candle. In 1936, a newspaper clipping mentions a traveling revival led by Lott and Daughters, claiming 2 young girls performed the lighting hymn. No names, no ages, no later mention. But a personal journal from a congregant describes the event as a gift of flame that left us cold. She writes, "They sang like they'd done it before. Not here, but many times. Their mouths stayed closed, but the sound came anyway." Census records for these counties, especially in the rural edges, show an eerie pattern. From 1920 to 1960, female child listings dropped sharply, In some years, they vanish altogether. One federal surveyor, Charles Dent, annotated his 1954 census sheet with a single word beside the 0 to 9 female category: withheld. When asked later what he meant, he replied, "They told me not to ask, not to write it down. Said the girls don't stay long enough to count." Even church rosters reflect this. Baptism logs from Pine Hollow, Candle Ridge Baptist, and Hope Hill Pentecostal show an overwhelming bias toward male baptisms. One ledger, scorched along the edges but mostly legible, contains a column labeled "Untouched" with 13 unnamed female entries crossed out in wax. The bottom line reads, "Return to God by candlelight." No such ritual exists in any known denomination. But the phrase, "return to God by candlelight," appears in 5 separate counties across hymn notes, funeral programs, and hand-copied Bibles between 1930 and 1970. Then there's the issue of names. The name Candle is the most infamous, but it's not the only one. Repeatedly, investigators and folklorists have come across variations, not surnames, but first names, consistently paired across decades. Always twins, always girls, Twyla and Minna, Mary and Ruth, Elsie and Annalie, Clara and May. And in each case, one or both are either burned, vanished, or described in witness accounts as lit. In 1978, a school photo from Harlan County showed 2 girls labeled M. Harrell and T. Latch. Identical uniforms, mirror hairstyles, but something was off. Upon closer examination, the girls are not standing side by side, but reflected in a long mirror propped up behind the class. One stands in front of it. The other, supposedly the reflection, holds a different expression. Neither child was enrolled the following year. Even into the 21st century, these pairings persist. A 2004 court case involving foster children in Letcher County included twin girls removed from a home due to ritualistic behavior. The girls would only speak in unison, refused to eat unless their plates were arranged symmetrically, and hummed during thunderstorms. They were eventually separated. Within 6 months, one girl had disappeared from her placement entirely. The case file was sealed, but one notation remains. Referred for religious trauma counseling, both claimed they were lit by God. Why this repetition? Why these twins? Across bloodlines and borders, across eras and churches. Some researchers believe there was an underground religious movement, spread by traveling preachers and preserved through oral doctrine. Others believe the bloodlines themselves carry some inherited curse, an Appalachian twist on the European changeling myth, reinterpreted through fire. But the most compelling theory is simpler. They were not separate stories. They were the same story, told over and over, through different names and different girls, but always ending the same way, with wax, with flame, with silence. And then there's the birthmark. A midwife in 1939 described it as a soft shadow on the left shoulder, shaped like a droplet. Another in 1952 called it a candle's tear. In 1986, a foster parent referred to it as a flame under the skin. Different girls, same mark. Across decades, counties, lineages, every one of them disappeared. Folklore preserves what history tries to erase. And the pattern in these stories isn't just chilling, it's structured. It behaves like liturgy, like choreography. 2 girls, a flame, a silence, a vanishing. If you come from the Horrells, the Lots, the Latches, or any family who whispered about a sister who didn't make it to 10, you may be part of the pattern. If your photo albums skip a year, if your family Bible has 2 pages glued together around 1943, if your grandmother warned you never to light 2 candles before bed, she was trying to protect you. But from what? Perhaps the ritual, or perhaps the memory, because some memories burn, and some burn back. The scariest part of a forgotten story isn't that it once happened, it's that it might happen again. That somewhere out in the world, the same patterns are still unfolding, just under new names, behind new curtains, with modern masks but ancient intentions. And in Claiborne County, and counties like it, the Candle Sisters are no longer past tense. They are present, flickering, returning. It began quietly, not with a fire, not with a disappearance, but with a drawing. In 2017, a teacher at Red Hollow Elementary, just 15 miles from where Pine Hollow once stood, filed a behavioral report on a 7-year-old student named Emily. The girl had drawn dozens of identical images during free periods, 2 girls standing inside rings of dripping wax. At first, the drawings were dismissed as an overactive imagination, but the teacher grew alarmed when Emily began whispering a melody while coloring, the same wordless hymn described in mid-century psychiatric notes. The one thought lost to oral history, the muffling song. When asked where she'd heard it, Emily responded, "Twyla taught me. She said Minna wants to play." Her parents denied knowing anyone by either name. That same week, Emily's baby sister suffered burns after playing too close to a candle left on a bedroom dresser. No one in the house recalled lighting it. Then came the posts. At first, they seemed like standard rural folklore, shared in quiet corners of Reddit, on ghost hunting forums, and Appalachian Facebook groups. But the details were too consistent to ignore. A woman from Kentucky posted about recurring dreams where she walked through an old house with walls made of wax and heard 2 girls whispering from inside the mirror. A man from Tennessee claimed his daughter, age 8, began asking for her matching dress and refused to eat unless her food was split perfectly in 2. One story came from a nurse at a juvenile center who reported a girl rocking in her sleep, humming a song with no words, and waking up with burn marks on her wrists, marks shaped like melted thimbles. Another described an entire class of 3rd graders participating in an unofficial game where 2 girls stood in the middle of a chalk circle and refused to speak unless asked the same question at the same time. When one teacher asked them what the game was called, both answered, "It's called lighting." All across Appalachia, reports began to cluster. But unlike in decades past, there were now digital footprints, forum threads, deleted YouTube videos, archived live streams where paranormal explorers found wax symbols in abandoned churches they weren't supposed to enter. One popular channel known for exploring haunted locations filmed at what they believed to be an ordinary backwoods structure. Within 20 minutes of entering, the camera feed began to glitch. A child's voice, barely audible, whispered, "Don't light it without her." The footage was removed days later. The creators have not posted since. Law enforcement, as always, remained silent. But one police report from Claiborne County, leaked by a retired dispatcher in 2022, tells of a noise complaint called in by a neighbor. The address listed was Candle Ridge Lane, though no such lane exists on the map. The responding officer noted that the house appeared abandoned, yet flickering light could be seen through the slats. Inside, he found 2 children's shoes placed heel to heel beside a circle of wax and a piece of paper burned at the edges. What survived of the writing read, "They're back, but we never left." Modern-day witnesses speak of strange synchronicities, sisters waking at the same time despite sleeping in different rooms, candle wax melting in the shape of names never spoken aloud, girls with matching birthmarks crying during thunder with no explanation. One foster mother described a pair of twins she cared for briefly in 2021. The girls would only respond to questions when asked simultaneously. And once, during a power outage, she swore she saw their faces glowing faintly in the dark, as if lit from within. The resurgence of candle lore has also reached digital communities dedicated to genealogy. One user claimed that while building a family tree, she found the names Minna and Twyla listed in a great-aunt's handwritten Bible, though no other records of their existence appear in public archives. When she asked her grandmother about the names, the old woman went silent, then whispered, "They were lit before they were born, and lit again after." The next day, that section of the tree was mysteriously wiped from her ancestry account. Why is it happening now? Some say it's the return of belief, that the collective forgetting of the 20th century is unraveling, and the old fires are rising again in memory, in story, in ritual. Others believe the bloodlines have awakened, that the girls who were taken left something behind, a rhythm, a mark, a flame that pulses through DNA and finds its way back to wax, or maybe it never stopped happening. Maybe it just went underground long enough for us to forget what to fear. And what of the house? In 2023, a man hiking near Sugar Fork reported seeing two girls standing at the edge of the woods, each holding a candle. He approached, calling out. They turned and walked into the trees, and when he followed, the path twisted impossibly, leading him back to his car in less than 30 seconds. He returned to the site days later with a friend. The path was gone, but wax marks remained on the trees. Two parallel drips, side by side. And in September of the same year, an anonymous message was posted to a ghost forum that simply read, "The girls are walking again, mirrors won't hold them, and the wax is soft." So what does it mean, this return? It means the story isn't finished, that some rituals don't die, they wait. That fire, when denied oxygen, doesn't go out. It smolders. If your daughter has started humming in her sleep, if your twin nieces draw wax circles and refuse to explain, if someone in your family tree vanished before age 10 and no one ever said why, it may not be coincidence, it may be memory, and memory burns. In Appalachian folklore, names are never just names, they are permissions, they are portals. A name spoken aloud gives breath to what was supposed to stay buried. And when it comes to the Candle Sisters, or more specifically the name Candle itself, the evidence suggests something far worse than coincidence. This isn't just a name that lingers, it's a name that rewrites. It first came to light in 1935 when a court case involving the guardianship of two orphaned girls, twins, included an unusual signature on the custody paperwork. R. Candle. The presiding judge, Harold Sims, was quoted in a private letter later saying, "No one knows who this Candle person is. The ink wasn't even dry when the file disappeared from my desk." That document has never resurfaced. But an identical signature, same tilt, same trailing loop on the D, appears again in a 1962 court ruling in neighboring Harlan County, where custody of two more unnamed girls was quietly transferred back to family. Once again, the guardian listed was R. Candle. There is no known person registered with that name in the state of Tennessee across any public records from 1900 to 2000, but the signature keeps returning, always the same. A feminine hand, black ink, curved letters like smoke rings. In 1988, a Knoxville school board investigation into a homeschooling case turned up paperwork signed by a guardian named M. Candle, again, with no identification, no address, no social security number. When the school attempted to verify, they were told by the county clerk that the file had already been withdrawn. The clerk later admitted, under a pseudonym in a folklore study, that she'd never seen such documents behave that way. It was like they moved themselves, she said. I'd file them, and the next morning they'd be gone, or placed somewhere else, like the name didn't want to sit still. Even digital records seem to fail when it comes to Candle. A researcher in 2009 attempted to build a family tree for the Claiborne County region using an online genealogy tool. Every time she entered the name Candle, whether as a surname or a middle name, the program glitched, erasing linked family members and collapsing entire branches. Screenshots of her efforts show normal, detailed family lines until they touch the Candle name. Then, the screen goes black. A single prompt remains. Please confirm deletion. She never pressed the button, but the tree deleted itself anyway. A librarian in Jefferson County noted a similar occurrence when scanning archival pages from an old church ledger. When the scanner hit the name Twila Candle, the machine froze, emitted a high-pitched whine, and printed a single sheet, blank except for the words, printed in reverse. She was never gone. But it's not just the way the name avoids record. It's how it infects record. In 2021, an archivist revisiting a batch of scanned county documents noticed an odd detail. The name Candle appeared in court transcripts where it hadn't been before. In a 1954 divorce case, one paragraph read, "He claimed she was seeing a man named Candle, but the original document in ink," said Conrad. Somehow, the digital scan shifted the name, as if the archive itself was reconfiguring to include it. That same year, a woman in Knoxville was researching her maternal lineage for a university course. She traced her great-aunt to a small town just outside Claiborne, but when she pulled the microfilm to view the birth certificate, the name had been crossed out and replaced with Minna Candle in faint, waxy print. Thinking it was an error, she looked up the hospital records. No Minna Candle had ever been born there, but a nurse's personal notebook from that week included a single note: "Born in wax, breathing in pairs." The phenomenon has become so prevalent among local archivists that some now refer to it as the wax drift, a term used to describe the spontaneous appearance of candle-related names in historical documents that, just months before, bore no sign of them. One researcher even created a chart showing the spread, from Claiborne to Harlan, to Letcher, to Campbell. Always after someone tries to speak the names aloud, always faster than before. And then there's the handwriting. Across dozens of decades, counties, and completely unrelated documents, from school withdrawal forms to church donation slips, the same style of cursive reappears, elegant, slanted, always with the same curving ampersand between Minna and Twyla. Forensic handwriting analysts have confirmed that these samples, despite spanning nearly 90 years, were likely written by the same hand. But how? The answer perhaps lies not in the handwriting, but in the idea of rewriting itself. Because this name, this presence, doesn't just reappear. It replaces. It bends the narrative, corrupts the ledger, twists the past. And in doing so, it ensures its own survival. That is the horror of the Candle sisters. Not that they were forgotten, but that they are remembering themselves through us. When spoken aloud, their names invite return. When written, they overwrite. When thought of too long, they show up where they weren't before. A woman once said that after researching Candle lineage, her own daughter's school registration suddenly printed Twyla under preferred name. She hadn't entered it. A man claims he tried to write the names in a journal, only to find the pages too slick with some residue, like melted wax, for the ink to hold. The records don't hold because they were never meant to, not once the name is spoken, and still, they come. So if your family has ever found a document that changed when you looked at it twice, if a name appeared in a registry that shouldn't have, if your own signature didn't look quite like yours, you may have already invited them in, because the name isn't just a name, it's a door, and it opens both ways. On May 17th, 2024, a renovation crew working on the foundation of an abandoned Methodist church near Morristown discovered a sealed envelope behind the altar. It was wrapped in oilcloth, tucked between stone and mortar, as though it had been placed there deliberately, not hidden, but protected. Inside were 3 objects: a burned family tree with a final entry reading "Minna and Twyla lit together," a faded photograph of 2 young girls standing barefoot in wax rings, and a torn scrap of paper bearing a sentence written in what appeared to be charcoal: "Return them, or burn them again." No one knows who wrote it. The document was never filed. The church had been empty since 1976, but those who held the envelope, the laborers, the archivist, even the historian who documented the find, reported strange side effects in the weeks that followed. One man stopped speaking entirely. A woman began waking in the middle of the night with burns on her fingertips, though she hadn't touched an open flame. Another claimed he began dreaming in a language he didn't recognize, until a linguist revealed that the melody in his dreams matched the intervals of the muffling hymn, last recorded in Claiborne County in 1949. Whatever the truth is, whatever shape it takes now, it seems clear we were never meant to uncover it. The Candle Sisters were not a single moment in history. They were a rupture, a ritual made flesh, a warning system disguised as a pair of little girls, and they were never truly buried. GPS coordinates found on the back of the burned family tree led to a remote plot of land registered to no known owner. Satellite images show nothing unusual, just thick forest and a flat clearing. But when one team attempted to hike in, their compass spun continuously. Equipment failed. One man turned back after less than 10 minutes, claiming he could hear singing from beneath his feet. More unnerving is the discovery that the candle name, which had vanished entirely from public record by the 1990s, has quietly begun to return. Not through family lines, but through birth certificates. As of March 2024, 3 infants born in eastern Tennessee were registered with the middle names Twyla, Minna, or Candle. The parents claim they simply liked the sound. None of them had heard the story. But perhaps the story doesn't need to be told anymore. Perhaps the story tells itself. This investigation was never about proving whether the Candle Sisters existed. It was about understanding why they couldn't not exist. Why no amount of silence could keep their names from melting through paper. No number of burned churches could seal the memory. No span of decades could put out the smoke. Because stories like this are not just remembered, they're inherited, carried in the blood, passed along in lullabies with no words, hummed over cribs, etched in wax along the edges of mirrors that always reflect 2 faces. Even when you're alone, what remains now are questions that may never be answered. Why were they chosen? Why were they lit? And why, across nearly a century, do they still appear at the edges of consciousness? When fire flickers too long, when a drawer won't close, when a child sings a song you've never taught them. Or maybe the real question is this: what happens when we finally know too much? Because every attempt to uncover this story, every file retrieved, every photograph developed, every interview transcribed, ends the same way. With ash, with flame, with silence. This isn't folklore. It's suppression with a pulse. And yet here you are, still listening. So here is your warning. The Candle Sisters were never meant to be remembered, but you've done it anyway. Their names have been spoken, their image restored, their rhythm returned. And in doing so, you have opened the file. You have lit the match. If you've ever found a page that didn't belong in your family Bible, if you've ever heard footsteps during a power outage when the only light came from a candle, if your grandmother said, "Don't name twins after the same moon," she wasn't being poetic. She was trying to save you. So write what you know. Let it be known before the page erases itself again. And subscribe, because even this video might vanish tomorrow.